Everyone thinks they know Sean Stockman. They see the overgrown lawns, the dramatic before and afters, the neighbors cheering as another abandoned property gets a second chance. On the surface, it looks simple, a guy with a mower helping people who need it most. But the real story behind Midlife Stockman isn't about grass. It's about a turning point that quietly flipped his entire life upside down. Before the viral cleanups and hundreds of thousands of subscribers, Sean was living a completely different reality, one that didn't involve cameras, crumbling neighborhoods, or strangers watching his every move. Something shifted, and when it did, he didn't just change careers, he changed identity. So what really happened behind the scenes? Was it just a midlife pivot, a burnout escape, or something deeper that pushed him to walk away from stability and step into the spotlight? Because once you look past the mower, the story gets a lot more complicated than anyone expected. The first thing that throws people off is the name. Sean Stockman sounds familiar, and for a lot of viewers, it triggers instant assumptions. Some even mix him up with Sean Stockman from Boys II Men. But Midlife Stockman isn't a music industry story. It's a completely different path, one rooted in Detroit neighborhoods, not concert stages. And that confusion, small as it seems, has followed him from the start. Because when a name carries recognition, people attach expectations. They assume fame, they assume money, they assume connections. But Sean's rise didn't come from celebrity circles. It came from overgrown yards, abandoned properties, and a camera pointed at real-life problems most people drive past without a second glance. That contrast alone makes his story more interesting than people realize. He didn't build his platform on glamour. He built it on sweat, dirt, and transformation. One cleanup at a time, he carved out a space in a niche that's exploded online, restoring neglected spaces for free and capturing the entire process. Viewers didn't just watch lawns get cut, they watched neighborhoods breathe again, they watched overwhelmed homeowners cry, they watched blocks slowly regain pride. But here's where it gets deeper. When your entire brand is tied to helping, the audience holds you to a different standard. They don't just expect content, they expect integrity. And when your name is already misunderstood from day one, that pressure doubles. Because behind the viral transformations, there's a bigger question forming. How did a regular guy with a familiar name turn into one of the most talked about cleanup creators online? And what pushed him to start in the first place? It didn't start with a business plan. It started with a building most people had already given up on. An abandoned preschool sat there, overgrown and forgotten, like it didn't matter anymore. Windows dull. Grass swallowing the sidewalk. The kind of place you glance at for a second and then keep driving. But Sean didn't keep driving. Something about that spot stuck with him, and instead of scrolling past it like everyone else, he pulled over and got to work. According to local Detroit coverage, that cleanup became the spark that changed everything. He didn't just trim the grass. He cleared debris, reshaped the space, and documented the entire transformation. What looked like a random act turned into something bigger the moment people saw it online. Because once viewers watched a space go from neglected to restored in a single video, they didn't just see yard work, they saw possibility. And that reaction hit fast. The comments poured in, more locations were suggested. More neighbors reached out. What began as one cleanup quietly turned into a mission. Not because he announced it, but because momentum built around him. And when momentum builds on the internet, it doesn't slow down, it accelerates. But here's the part most people overlook. That first cleanup wasn't backed by a massive following. It wasn't guaranteed to go viral. It was a risk, time, effort, energy, and no promise it would matter. Yet it did. And once he realized the impact one transformation could have on a neighborhood, and on his own sense of purpose, there was no easy way to go back to life as usual. Before the mower, before the camera, before thousands of people waited for the next transformation, Sean was living a life that looked stable. Predictable hours, corporate structure, a steady routine most people are told to chase. On paper, it made sense. But behind the scenes, something wasn't lining up. Local reporting has described him as a former video editor who later worked a traditional 9-to-5 job before hitting a turning point a couple of years ago. That detail changes everything, because it explains why his videos feel different. He didn't stumble into YouTube clueless. He understood pacing, storytelling, and how to make a moment land. The editing wasn't accidental. The emotional build wasn't random. He knew exactly how to shape a narrative. But knowing how to tell stories and feeling stuck inside your own are two very different things. That's where the tension builds. You can follow the safe path, collect the paycheck, and still feel like you're drifting. And when that feeling stretches on long enough, it starts to get loud. The kind of loud you can't drown out with routine. So when that abandoned preschool showed up at the right moment, it wasn't just a cleanup opportunity. It was an exit ramp. And once he stepped onto it, there was no halfway point. You don't walk away from stability unless something inside you has already shifted. The real transformation didn't happen on a lawn. It happened internally. But trading predictability for purpose comes with a cost, and that cost doesn't show up in the thumbnail. The channel didn't just grow, it exploded. What started as one meaningful cleanup quickly turned into hundreds of thousands of people watching, subscribing, and waiting. At one point, local coverage noted his audience had climbed into the hundreds of thousands, pushing him into the upper tier of creators in the cleanup niche. And that kind of growth changes the game overnight. Because when the numbers rise, so do the expectations. Suddenly, it's not just about helping one homeowner. It's about consistency. It's about delivering transformations that feel bigger, more emotional, more dramatic than the last. The internet doesn't slow down. It refreshes, it demands, it compares. And when your entire platform is built around visible impact, every new project has to top the previous one. That pressure is subtle at first, then it gets heavy. Viewers don't just want trimmed grass, they want tears, reactions, gratitude, viral moments. They want proof that what they're watching matters. And when your mission is rooted in service, walking that line between genuine help and compelling content becomes complicated fast. Because here's the truth no one talks about. When good deeds are filmed, they become performance adjacent whether you intend them to or not. That doesn't erase the impact, but it does add weight. And the bigger the platform gets, the harder it becomes to separate purpose from production. But growth doesn't just bring pressure. It brings something else that's even harder to control. Growth doesn't just bring applause, it brings exposure. Once Sean's videos started reaching massive audiences, the cleanups weren't happening quietly anymore. They were public, filmed, shared, analyzed. And when you're working in real neighborhoods with real people, that visibility can shift the energy fast. Overgrown properties aren't empty movie sets. They're attached to families, histories, tensions, and sometimes complicated situations. Neighbors don't always know who you are. Strangers don't always trust cameras. And even when intentions are solid, showing up with equipment and filming equipment can raise eyebrows in seconds. That unpredictability is part of what makes the content gripping. You're not watching a controlled renovation show. You're watching real-time interactions that could go in any direction. Gratitude is common, factual, but confusion, suspicion, or pushback can happen too. And when you're operating at scale, it only takes one tense moment to spark backlash online. Then there's safety. Abandoned or neglected properties can hide more than tall grass. Broken glass, unstable structures, sharp debris. You don't see the risk in the final edit. You see the transformation, but behind every smooth 5-minute reveal is hours of physical labor in unpredictable conditions. And the bigger the audience gets, the more eyes are watching for mistakes. One misstep can spread faster than 100 successful projects. But the physical risks weren't the only threat growing alongside the channel. Something else started surfacing. And this time, it wasn't happening in the yards. Just when the mission seemed locked in, a different kind of problem started creeping in. And this one wasn't growing in someone's front yard. As his audience expanded, so did the number of fake profiles using his name and image. At one point, he publicly warned viewers that imposters were creating accounts and pretending to be him. He made it clear, he would never reach out asking for money. That statement alone tells you how serious it got. When a creator built on trust has to issue a warning like that, it means the line between real and fake is starting to blur. And that's dangerous, because his entire brand revolves around community impact. Seniors, struggling homeowners, neighborhood pride. If someone posing as him convinces a viewer to send money, even once, the damage doesn't just hit the victim. It hits the credibility of the entire mission. The internet moves fast, but trust moves slowly. It takes years to build and seconds to fracture. What makes it worse is that impersonation isn't something you can physically mow down or clean up. You can't trim it, bag it, and haul it away. It spreads quietly through comment sections and DMs, hiding behind profile pictures that look convincing at first glance. And while he's out in neighborhoods trying to restore physical spaces, he's also forced to defend his digital identity at the same time. But even with imposters and pressure swirling around the brand, the biggest shift wasn't external, it was personal. Here's the part most people miss. Nothing happened to Sean Stockman in the dramatic, headline-grabbing way the internet loves. There wasn't a public meltdown, no major scandal, no exposed secret that flipped everything upside down. What really happened was quieter. And in some ways, heavier. He chose a different life. Behind Midlife Stockman isn't a mystery collapse, it's a calculated leap. He stepped away from a structured, predictable world and into something uncertain, physical, and constantly scrutinized. That shift alone changes a person. When your work becomes public service blended with public content, you don't clock out the same way anymore. Purpose replaced routine, but pressure replaced privacy. Every cleanup carries expectation. Every upload carries commentary. Every decision gets weighed by thousands of strangers who feel invested in what you represent. And when your identity becomes tied to being the guy who helps, you don't just carry equipment, you carry perception. That's the real transformation. It's easy to focus on the lawns because they're visible, but the deeper shift happened internally. He redefined himself in real time, in front of an audience that keeps growing. And sustaining that kind of reinvention isn't simple. It requires consistency, resilience, and the ability to absorb criticism without losing direction. So what really happened behind Midlife Stockman? A man hit a crossroads and didn't turn back. And once you choose purpose over comfort, there's no clean-cut edge to return to. So when people ask what really happened to Sean Stockman behind Midlife Stockman, they're usually expecting drama, a scandal, a downfall, some hidden twist that explains everything. But the truth is more subtle, and maybe more powerful. He didn't disappear, he didn't implode, he pivoted. What looks like lawn care on the surface is actually a story about identity, risk, and reinvention. He stepped away from predictability and built something rooted in impact, knowing it would come with scrutiny, pressure, and constant expectation. That's not a collapse. That's a gamble. And the real question isn't whether the mission is real. It's whether anyone can carry that kind of public purpose forever without it changing them. Because once your life becomes content, the line between who you are and what you do starts to blur. Maybe nothing happened to Sean Stockman at all. Maybe he just decided he wasn't willing to stay the same.